Today's story is the case of the vanishing violin. The rain fell in heavy sheets as Detective Eleanor Gray stepped into the dimly lit music hall. She carried with her a reputation for solving the unsolvable, but the case that awaited her tonight seemed impossible even by her standards. The call had come just hours earlier. A priceless 17th century violin, the Amadeo Stradivarius, had vanished from a locked display at the Belladonna Music Academy. The theft had taken place during a gala performance. Guests had mingled in the grand foyer, champagne glasses clinking, while the violin rested in its glass case, supposedly untouchable. But when the curtain fell after the final act, the case was empty. No sign of a break-in, no fingerprints, no witnesses. Eleanor stood before the display now, her sharp blue eyes scanning the scene. The glass case was intact, and its high-tech locking mechanism showed no signs of tampering. She ran her fingers lightly over the edges of the frame. It was then she noticed a faint residue, almost imperceptible, near the seam of the glass. "Glue," she muttered, pulling a magnifying lens from her pocket. The residue shimmered faintly under the lens, a quick-drying adhesive designed to seal the glass temporarily. Someone had cut the glass and replaced it with a seamless replica. Clever, but not flawless. She turned to the head of the academy, a nervous man named Arthur Morrow. His face was pale, his hands wringing a silk handkerchief. "Who had access to the display?" Eleanor asked. Arthur hesitated. "Well, only a handful of staff. Myself, the curator, and a few technicians who helped set up the gala. But they've all been with us for years. I trust them implicitly." Eleanor's gaze narrowed. "Trust is admirable, but we're dealing with someone who had detailed knowledge of this display." "Where's the curator?" "Miss Lillian Hart? She left just after the performance, but I can call her." "No need," Eleanor interrupted. "I'll visit her myself. In the meantime, have the technicians wait here. I'd also like to speak with them." Lillian Hart's apartment was a bohemian haven, filled with antique instruments, abstract art, and the faint scent of jasmine. She opened the door wearing a silk robe, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. "Detective Gray," Lillian greeted, her tone calm but guarded. "I heard about the theft. It's terrible." "Terrible, indeed," Eleanor replied, stepping inside. "I understand you were responsible for curating the Stradivarius exhibit?" "Yes," Lillian said, her voice tight. "I oversaw everything personally. It was my masterpiece, ensuring the violin was displayed with the reverence it deserves." Eleanor's eyes wandered to a small wooden box on a side table. It was open, revealing a collection of fine tools, tweezers, blades, and tiny brushes. "Restoration tools?" she asked. Lillian followed her gaze and nodded. "For my side projects. I restore antique instruments in my free time." Eleanor picked up a brush, its bristles flecked with a familiar glimmering residue. "Is that so?" she said, raising an eyebrow. Back at the academy, Eleanor gathered the staff in the main hall. Arthur, the technicians, and Lillian stood in tense silence. "I've solved the mystery of the disappearing violin," Eleanor announced, "and I regret to say the thief is among us." A gasp rippled through the room. Whoever stole the violin knew they couldn't sell it outright. It's too recognizable. Instead, they planned to replace it with a forgery, which would only work if no one inspected it closely for weeks. To achieve this, they needed access to specialized tools and knowledge of both the display case and the violin itself. Eleanor's gaze landed on Lillian. "Miss Hart, you had both. Your restoration tools contained the same adhesive used on the display case, and your late departure from the gala gave you the perfect opportunity to make the switch." Lillian's face darkened, but she didn't deny the accusation. Instead, she straightened her posture. "Prove it," she said coolly. Eleanor smiled. "I already have. The replica violin in your workshop bears a tiny imperfection, a mismatched grain in the wood, invisible to most, but glaring to an expert like me. You swapped the violins and intended to return the original once you'd made a private deal to secure your fortune." The room fell silent. Lillian's defiance crumbled, and she let out a resigned sigh. "You're clever, detective, she said as officers escorted her away. "I'll give you that." Eleanor watched her go, then turned to Arthur. "The Stradivarius will be safe in evidence for now, but I suggest investing in better security before you put it back on display." Arthur nodded, still pale but relieved. As Eleanor stepped out into the rain, she allowed herself a small smile. Another case closed, another secret uncovered, and yet, the city's mysteries never truly ended.